Our next debate is for the City of Bellingham City Council Ward 1 position. There are 2 candidates on the ballot for this race, and I'd like to introduce them. We have candidate Elizabeth Hartsoch, and we have candidate Hannah Stone. The City of Bellingham Council is the legislative body for the city, responsible for setting public policies, adopting long-range plans, approving the budget and taxes, and passing laws. Council members are engaged in the community and responsive to constituent concerns. The Council Ward 1 term of office is 4 years with an annual salary of $27,132. Candidate Hartsoch.
Thank you. My name is Beth Hartsoch, and I would love to represent Ward 1 on the Bellingham City Council. I'm a research analyst, a utility cyclist, a union member, a civic activist, and a mother. 4 generations of my family live in Bellingham's first ward, from Cordata to Columbia and from age 8 to age 90. There are 3 leadership needs I want to fill on Bellingham's council. First, I want to lead on transportation. The status quo of building streets just for cars and cars alone isn't working. I want streets where you can drive if you need to, but you can also walk with your kids or with your walker and feel safe. Transforming transportation is key to having vibrant and affordable housing at a higher density. It will make Bellingham safer for kids and seniors, reduce isolation, improve health, reduce our carbon emissions and air and water pollution, and save us all money. Other cities have built lightning networks in 2 years using low-cost creative materials. In my first year, we'll start a crossing guard program for kids. 90% of Washington schools have them. There's funding available, and the state wrote a manual on how to set it up. We can get this done. Second, I will work outside the walls of City Hall. I will support community-led solutions like limited equity cooperative housing, universal rental applications, and providing advance notice of ICE activity. And I'll advocate for simple and immediate actions that will help where people are struggling right now, testing ideas and learning from mistakes. We'll build partnerships based on shared goals with our neighboring tribes, with legislators in Olympia, with Whatcom County and neighboring cities. Imagine the transit and rail we can build when Amazon pays their fair share in state taxes. And third, we'll measure things that matter. I will lead on our use of data and use those metrics to inform council decisions and share with residents. We can borrow models like Spokane's use of force dashboard or Philadelphia's public data dashboard. Effective advocacy requires information access.
Ms. Stone.
Thank you. Good morning. I want to thank you all for coming. My name is Hannah Stone. I was appointed to the City Council to fill a vacancy last October. I've been on a steep learning curve over the last year, and now I'm seeking to remain on the council as the Ward 1 representative. So there are a couple things that I feel like I bring to the table as a city council member. One is being an attorney. Sometimes I laugh about the fact that I'm not actually a big fan of attorneys myself, but I think we do have some assets to bring to the table. So just thinking about logical reasoning and critical thinking and asking hard questions. But in addition to being very, pragmatic, I also have a lot of passion. Said I wasn't going to do this. And so lots of times, if people have heard me speak, you've probably seen me cry, and I haven't done that in a while, until today, of course. So my work focuses on immigration law, and one of the things that I'm so passionate about is needing to bring additional voices to the table, and not just with respect to immigration, but across the board. I don't think that our city does a good job of inclusion and reaching out and making sure that we're engaging with impacted communities who are directly affected by the decisions that we're making. Finally, my commitment to community, just that myself and my family were all in on every level. And sorry. So there's a huge sacrifice in running for office, but I'm doing this because I really believe in the future of Bellingham. And there are 3 things that I think are most important right now, and they all relate to housing. So thinking about needing to really address the root causes of homelessness, looking at housing affordability, obviously, and how we're going to preserve and protect our home, that being our neighborhood and the culture of Bellingham, in addition to the planet and the environment. Thank you.
So now I'm going to ask questions that will rotate as to who answers first, and I'll try to stay in order, but we'll start now with Ms. Hartsoch. And candidate Hartsoch, what do you think are the city's 3 biggest financial challenges and now and in the next 10 years?
Great question. Okay, so 3 big financial challenges. Let's say maintaining our infrastructure. We've built a lot of streets and other kinds of infrastructure, and maintaining those and responding to new challenges is going to be hard work, especially as we annex Alderwood and think about how we're going to bring that infrastructure up to our city code. A second one is going to be Lake Whatcom. Really managing the quality of water in Lake Whatcom in the long term and thinking about how we treat that water in order for drinking, and then how we treat water before it's going into our bay is expensive and going to be a challenge. And then third expensive thing, climate. That's going to require a huge partnership at the state level.
Candidate Stone.
Certainly. So thinking about just financial issues, one obviously is how we're going to meet the climate targets that we've set out. And so that's going to be a heavy lift across the board for the entire community, and making sure that certain communities aren't disproportionately impacted by that heavy lift. And so doing our part. The other part is housing affordability. And so leaving things open to the market obviously isn't working right now. And so needing to step up to provide additional housing, and that being access and availability. But finally, is really, when you think about finances, is needing to come up with new revenue streams and funding sources. And so one of the things that Senator Hasegawa down in Olympia has brought forward is the idea of public banking, and ways that the local government can leverage funds to really support industry and projects here at the local community.
And starting now with candidate Stone, what should the council strategy be when it comes to bolstering future economic development and vitality across Bellingham? And please include job creation in your response.
So our job as a city and city leaders is certainly tied to economic development and making sure that we're doing our part to maintain the vitality of our community. And so part of that is job creation, but one of the struggles we face right now, again, is mentioning housing. And so when housing affordability is such an issue and such a barrier, that's obviously acting as a detriment right now to bringing new businesses and helping the community grow and thrive. But certainly we need to have a broad base of partnerships and making sure that we're not doing those heavy lifts ourselves, but that we're engaging with partners across the region, and also seeking funding sources from a variety of bases, looking at federal, state, and local sources, and again, going back to the possibility of public banking.
And candidate Hartsoch.
I agree with Hannah that workforce housing is a key challenge that we can make progress on to create more jobs in town. Employers can't afford to stay if their employees can't afford to live here. And second, I think that as we approach our response to climate change, it's going to be really helpful to do that in the framework of a Green New Deal, because that ties the big chunk of work that we have to do with creating a pipeline for 21st century jobs that are going to get that work done. So that means collaborating with other municipalities and with the state, collaborating with the universities so they know what kind of training needs that we're going to have for the people who are going to do the work that we outline in our climate action plan.
And this one will begin with candidate Hartsoch. What is the role of council members outside of policy in council chambers to help move the community forward on the big challenges ahead of us?
Did you repeat the question?
I will. What is the role of council members outside of policy in council chambers to help move the community forward on the big challenges ahead of us?
I think one of the most useful things that I have done in running for office, this is the first time I've ever run for office, is going out into the community and being with people as they face the challenges they face in the world. And two good examples, and I think that is probably one of the most valuable things that council members could do. So two good examples of that from my campaign are talking with people who live in a mobile home park about the housing affordability issues that they face, the fact that many of them are on the doorstep of homelessness, and even our temporary moratorium on change of use for mobile home parks hasn't prevented the owner from increasing the rent for for people newly moving in, which threatens the whole business model. And the second piece is riding paratransit with my friend who's disabled and has a child, and it became very clear that paratransit is not accessible to disabled parents, and that was very useful for me.
Candidate Stone.
Yeah, so I think our role as council members goes far beyond, the meetings and the service that we provide in City Hall. And it's imperative that we are reaching out and engaged with the community. And what that means is that our political process a lot of times provides, public forums and opportunities for individuals to come forward. But that's not engagement. And that's putting the burden on the public to come forward. And really, we need to be going out into the community, sitting down, having face-to-face conversations, and finding out what's important to the community. And also that education and transparency piece where we're reaching out to make sure that the broader community is up to speed and knows what's happening so that we can facilitate feedback on the positives and negatives of what we're considering and how that's going to impact the community. And finally, it's that political will is not just forcing your way forward, but making sure to not be distracted by maybe the two polar opposite ends, but looking at always what's best for the majority.
And we'll begin this one with Candidate Stone. What part of your experience, personal or work experience, or any other piece of your background distinguishes you from your opponent and makes you qualified to be elected to the council?
So I would say that my educational experience as an attorney, the last year of hard work and commitment to the council, in addition to my work as an attorney and being engaged 100% on the front lines and really seeking out the diversity that we've been lacking. So when we moved here from North Carolina back in 2005, I've mentioned before that there seemed like there was a lack of diversity here. And then over the years, through my work, realizing that our community is rich with diversity. The unfortunate part is that we don't see it a lot of times because people aren't fully engaged and don't feel safe and welcome coming forward and engaging in that process. Okay, what's the second one? And so in addition to that, I think it's just my willingness to sit down with everybody, whether you agree with me or disagree with me, if we have differing views, it's that ability to sit down and listen, without judgment.
And Candidate Hartsoch.
Thank you. In my education and professional life, my job is to make meaning from data and to share that, to make meaning for people in the community and also to make meaning for decision makers. And I think that will be really valuable as a city council person. I've also, in my spare time, had years of advocacy on civic issues, a lot of advocacy on transportation infrastructure with the city, with the school district, and also just on civic engagement and civic access for people who have not traditionally had that kind of civic access. I work with the Riveters Collective, and one of our primary goals is to have a more diverse elected diversity in our elected people and in all of our civic bodies. And we've worked with other local groups to make that happen and move that forward.
This one will begin with Candidate Hartsoch. What are two specific ways that the City Council can support and protect the rights of our most vulnerable groups, such as undocumented residents, those without housing, and those who are victims of domestic violence?
a really hard question. Okay, so 2 ways that we could support. So number one that I've heard from people who organize around people who are undocumented is that we can provide, if we have information of ICE activity, we can provide that publicly to give them a heads up in advance. And I think that's something that city officials can and should do. For people who are homeless, we can immediately identify seats on city committees that are specifically for people who have experience with homelessness.
And Candidate Stone.
So I think a lot of this, when we think about disadvantaged and marginalized community members, it's all about avoiding that otherism and trying to humanize everybody who's in our community. So everyone in our community has value and worth, and they contribute, and we all rise and fall together. And I think a lot of the disconnect is really when we exclude particular groups or isolate them. And so I think a lot of it is just, again, humanizing people and bringing them into the fold and into the discussion to make sure that that we're all moving forward together and that the needs of all of us at every level are being addressed collectively.
Beginning now with Candidate Stone, what steps can the city take? What is the role of government in the creation of or encouraging affordable housing, including for the middle class within the city limits?
So one of the pieces is obviously being mindful of our city lines and making sure that we're growing responsibly and that we're focusing density in the right places. So some of it's increasing the number of, just units on the ground. But one of the things that we've seen with the current market is that even when additional units are provided, they're not necessarily going to be at affordable rates. And so part of it is partnering with organizations that are already doing that work, like Holston Land Trust and others. There's great models out there, but also making sure that we're stepping up to fill those gaps and to be committed to provide affordable housing and subsidize housing as necessary going forward. Thank you.
And Candidate Hartsoch.
Okay, so I think it's useful to think about problems and solutions in a couple of categories that we need to pursue in tandem. Short-term solutions that address challenges right now and long-term solutions that get at the drivers of problems, and we need both kinds of solutions. So short-term, we can require that landlords accept universal rental application. So when you're looking for housing, you only have to pay one fee and fill out one application. We can provide access to legal advice for tenants when they're dealing with their landlords. Those I would see as short-term solutions that can happen fairly quickly. Long-term, the city could provide a long-term lease on city-owned land for social housing, like a land trust or a co-op to build. And we can also make landlords provide the first right of offer to tenants when they're going to sell a building so that they could form a cooperative or a limited equity cooperative, and we can streamline financing for the purchase and maintenance of those.
And this one beginning with Candidate Hartsoch. What, if anything, should the city do to ensure a safe and adequate supply of water now and into the future?
That's a great question. I just spent 2 days touring our water treatment and wastewater treatment facilities. And so coming literally downstream in the watershed, we can partner with the county on reducing pollutants from entering our water to begin with. And there's a lot of work happening there, but I'm interested in how we can test and even spot test water quality to identify where point sources might be and even get feedback on how well our efforts are working there. Seeing the water treatment facility that we spend quite a bit of money on and then thinking that that water that we've just treated to drinkability level is what we're flushing our toilets with made me think a lot about gray water and how we could move forward on using that. And then, yeah, I guess maybe that's all. That's not all, but for now.
Candidate Stone.
So water quality is critical. I mean, when we think about, food access, water quality, and housing, I mean, water quality is going to be at the top of just basic human needs. And so it needs to be continually monitored and addressed. When we think about partnering with, obviously, the county and the port and Lummi Nation and thinking about water access, but as well as working on and following up on, the testing and monitoring of Lake Whatcom in particular. One of the biggest pieces that I think we're missing is the education and outreach to the community that lives, directly on the lake. And when you look at development, as well as just, maintenance of people's property and potential runoff and things that directly impact the water quality there, is making sure that we're having those conversations so that individuals understand their individual role and their individual impact on the problem.
This beginning with candidate Stone. Describe the role the city has in ensuring that all residents have use of computers and Wi-Fi and the skills to effectively function in an online world.
So we have large sectors of our community who are without, access and needing to look at increased broadband access throughout our region, things like Dig Once policies, and also working going forward and pressuring sort of the FCC and others. There are certain things that can be frustrating at a local level when you realize that policies are outside of our reach. But that doesn't mean that our work stops. It means that we need to do advocacy and outreach with our partners in Olympia as well as in Washington to make sure that the community at large is moving forward on those issues to make sure that there's access for all.
And candidate Hartsoch.
So one idea that I got from a member of our community is that, and it's being done in other cities, so we wouldn't be first on this, is to offer free Wi-Fi in our parks. In fact, in our parks or in each neighborhood, we could have a place that had running water and an electrical outlet and Wi-Fi, and that would actually help support families who are homeless in accessing some of their basic needs. We can also increase investment in our libraries. Libraries are one way that we provide information access to our community, and increased hours and just increased number of actual terminals available could help with that problem. And then in terms of fiber network, I think this is a partnership with the Port of Bellingham, which is really the leader on how we develop a really carefully planned public fiber network.
Starting with candidate Hartsoch, what is your assessment of the actions the city has taken to reduce carbon emissions, and do you think these efforts are satisfactory, or should the city be doing something else?
One of the biggest things that we've done in moving forward on reducing our carbon emissions is purchase of green power through PSE. And it's actually had a pretty big impact. I mean, I was impressed reading the climate action plan, how big of an impact that it had. Is it enough? No, it's clearly not even close to being enough. And I'm really grateful because we have a great climate action task force. I think the biggest thing we need to do now is get really far ahead on the messaging of this. Dealing with climate change is going to require partnerships at all levels, especially with the state and our neighboring tribes. And we're already behind the realtors and the building association on messaging, and we can't let that continue. It's going to be a community effort, and there's going to be a lot of support, financial support, and we need to get ahead of it.
And candidate Stone.
So with respect to carbon emissions reduction, we're taking some great first steps, and the city certainly needs to lead by example in taking those steps first and foremost, and adjusting our own fleets and installing solar panels and all the things that we can do. But in going forward, the suggestions and recommendations that will be coming forward on November 18th from the Climate Action Task Force are things that the council is then going to be grappling with about. We know that this is what we need to do. It's then figuring out how we do that and how we make sure that, again, we're moving forward collectively to make sure that one particular piece of the community isn't unfairly burdened or isn't left behind, because ultimately we can't do this alone, and to impact change on such a broad level with respect to the environment and carbon emissions really requires that everybody's on board and everyone's moving forward together.
And this will be our last question. And we'll begin with candidate Stone. What do you believe are the biggest problems facing the working class in Bellingham? And then please state with specificity your plans to address these problems.
In 60 seconds. So the problems addressing the working class, I think, are impacting lots of us, but obviously needing living wages, needing access to affordable housing, access to child care. It's really all-encompassing. It's the things that we need to create stability in our lives that will allow us to be productive going forward. And so I think the city's role in that is making sure that we're doing community-wide assessments to see what great work are our partners in the community doing, where are those gaps, and how are we either going to partner with others to fill those gaps, or how are we going to take up that work on our own? Because the work's going to need to be done one way or another. And in that respect, the city's role really is leadership and governance to set that bar high and to get us there.
And candidate Hartsoch.
Would you repeat the question?
Yes, I will. What do you believe are the biggest problems facing the working class in Bellingham? And state with specificity your plans to address these problems.
Okay. Housing affordability and insecurity is a huge, huge problem for people working in Bellingham, and that's tied to the fact that our wages aren't high enough for the housing costs. And then I would say that transportation is another piece of that puzzle. Our current infrastructure almost requires people to own and maintain cars, which is an extremely expensive thing to do. So plans to address that are, first and foremost, housing affordability tied with and underpinned by great transportation infrastructure that doesn't require car ownership for everyone. And then I agree with Hannah that childcare is a big part of this as well, especially for providing equitable access for people. So I think that all the things we discussed previously, like really investing in social housing and building a transportation network that is, as April said, irresistible. I think those are two big steps in moving that forward.
And now it's time for your closing. We'll start with candidate Hartsoch.
What will Bellingham look like in 10 years? Will we have vibrant, walkable, and dense and affordable housing in all of our neighborhoods, or will we have sprawl and gridlock traffic? I have a proven record of doing the daily hard work, collaborating with a team and achieving a goal. I founded the Riveters Collective, and we're currently knocking on the doors of 20,000 low-propensity voters to get out the vote in Whatcom County. I designed, funded, and directed the Viking e-bike project, which introduced electric bikes for university business at Western. I will use the same evidence-based and collaborative practices for you at the city. I'm proud to be endorsed by the Lummi Indian Business Council, the Bellingham Tenants Union, the Riveters Collective, Teamsters Local 231, Washington Bikes, Washington Conservation Voters, Alliance for Gun Responsibility, and local electeds Sharon Shoemake, Deborah Lakonoff, Chris Litton, Tim Balutu, Carol Frazee, Barry Buchanan, Satpal Sidhu, Todd Donovan, Eric Ritchie, Michael Shepard, Jen Mason, many more of your neighbors. I'd be honored to have your vote.
And candidate Stone.
So a lot of times people mention that I'm not very good at tooting my own horn or promoting myself, and I always mention my husband that it's something called humility, which some people know more about than others. He and I joke about. But the idea that humility is not thinking less of yourself or thinking less of myself and my ability to do this job, but thinking of myself less. And that's a quote from C.S. Lewis. But just wanting you all to know that the reason why I'm here is to provide a service to the community and to be that, sort of ombudsman. And part of my East Coast upbringing is what I will bring to the council and continue to bring. And that's the willingness and ability to sit down and have hard conversations, to sit down face to face, lay all the cards on the table. At the end of the day, we may have to agree to disagree, but having those conversations and then making decisions that are on the that have the broader community in mind.
Thank you both. Will you join me in thanking the candidates? Thank you both.